As the Galactic troops advanced through the crowded landscape, their victims trembled, and following them, their laughter reverberated as they made jokes about the alleged simplicity of their captive's world, Earth, and their confidence was evident. Was viewed as a primitive planet with crude tools and people who couldn't comprehend the intricacies of. However, the prisoner in interstellar warfare maintained silent and his eyes stayed. His face was focused front, and he didn't display any signs of fear, rage, or disobedience that only served to increase the soldiers' mockery as they publicly discussed their triumphs over Earth. The campaign had been brief, and they claimed that their subjugation of lesser Earth's forces had resisted. But it was nothing the Galactic soldiers had never witnessed before. Their superior training and cutting-edge technology had guaranteed an obvious result. The prisoner had been apprehended. During the last battle, they only had one soldier as a prize for their victory. Pointed to the inmate, who caused us some trouble but who removed 5 of. He answered with a mixture of displeasure and reluctance. Our best before we got him. Appreciation. Another soldier laughed and waved it away, saying that even a besieged beast retaliates, but now see him docile as a lamb, and they all chuckle. Observing the slight stiffening of the prisoner's jaw, they responded that the prisoner was not like anyone they had ever met. Silence, when the soldiers observed a defeated man, was not capitulation. Rather, it was calculating. He was observing them. Every jive commits their moves, routines, and weaknesses to memory. Every thoughtless remark and needless act of arrogance had bits of knowledge that he kept for his. Even though his body was confined, his mind was able to move swiftly as he determined how to proceed. With the galaxy soldiers alternated between sharing their experiences of raising towns, defeating armies, and bringing entire populations to their knees for them. It was a common practice and a means of killing time. As they returned to their ship, they characterized Earth's armaments as ridiculous and their tactics as incompetent. They were unaware that the prisoner was paying close attention and taking in everything they said, and as they spoke, their confidence increased. The state-of-the-art chains encircling the inmates' wrists were intended to stifle any physical strength that was above the ordinary. Any captive could be intimidated by the presence of holstered firearms, which gave them little cause for concern. Although the prisoner was already broken, his quiet remained intact. Wasn't defeat, but patience. He saw that pride frequently resulted in errors. These warriors were no different. They misjudged him in the same way that they had misjudged Earth. To them, they didn't realize that his plain human being was a primitive life form that had no chance against their technology. Strength was not found in technology, but rather in flexibility, fortitude, and an unwavering determination to live as one army. Beside the prisoner, he scoffed and inquired, "What's it like to know that your planet's best efforts were in vain? That your world will never be the same again?" The prisoner didn't reply. Flinch, his silence was so enraged that he didn't even glance at the soldier. Despite their best efforts to conceal it beneath their arrogant smiles, the troops put up a tiny camp. They made supper and drank from their ration packs while talking loudly and lowering their guard. They didn't bother to post a suitable guard because the prisoner was tethered to a tree with his chains fastened to an anchor. Since no one had ever escaped from their custody before, the prisoner sat peacefully with his eyes. The cuffs were sufficient. He looked around him, taking note of the soldiers' positions, where their guns were, and any gaps. He watched how they interacted, who gave commands and who obeyed. Every detail mattered, and he wasn't going to focus on them or who appeared preoccupied. Escape, but he continued to acquire information. Although escape was unavoidable, it had to be precisely timed. The troops' voices carried through the night as they continued to joke about. Some of them conjectured that the prisoner was a soldier, but they thought it was funny that Earth soldiers appeared so unimpressive that people made jokes about them possibly being rebels or criminals. Earth's own forces were unable to cope and chuckled at their own jokes without realizing, given that they were providing him with more details than they had anticipated. One of the younger soldiers was keen to demonstrate. He stooped to meet the prisoner's gaze and grinned, saying, "You're lucky we didn't kill you." His voice was brimming with disdain as he spoke, but don't assume that indicates that you'll receive mercy later. The prisoner didn't blink or respond. The young soldier stood up huffily as the night grew darker, and the soldiers scowled, irritated by the lack of response. Started to relax, ignoring the necessity for vigilance, since they believed that technology would warn them of any risk. Their biggest weakness was their overconfidence, as they viewed the prisoner as a trophy rather than a possible threat. Weakness, and the inmate was aware of it. He didn't need to hurry because he had already prevailed. By allowing them to underestimate him, he won half the war, and the camp's atmosphere calmed as the prisoner stayed up, his body motionless but his mind racing, before slipping into casual talk and finally falling asleep. Every movement, sound, and flicker of the campfire's light was recorded, and according to the analysis, the soldiers believed they had triumphed, although they were unaware of. Against this backdrop, the inmate's resolve only strengthened throughout the course of the hours. Was not merely a man seeking a chance, he was generating one that he was aware of. That he would be prepared when the time came because their conceit would prevent them from seeing the danger that was directly in front of them. The Galactic warriors would have written off the initial oversight as the cause of the containment breach. Irrelevant. A technical error temporarily disabled the lock mechanisms on the inmate's restraints. Soldiers who were too dependent on technology missed the prisoner's warning signal. Yet it was the only chance he required because his years of earthly training had sharpened his instincts to take quick action without. When an escape window opened, the prisoner's chains came loose. Allowing him to go swiftly, discreetly, and with accuracy, his first target was the soldier closest to him, whose weapon was resting idly by his side. Before anyone else could respond, the prisoner seized the weapon after a well-planned strike knocked the soldier unconscious. Didn't take a moment to rejoice because he realized that the element of surprise was just temporary. Would come at a heavy price, and the other soldiers fumbled, confused by the unexpected assault, depending on their sophisticated technology to coordinate directives and danger detection, yet the inmate's movements were too fast and erratic. He was already taking advantage of their vulnerabilities and the surroundings. Because of the natural protection afforded by the dense terrain and his deep understanding of Earth's survival strategies, he was able to stay. The initial counterattack was rapid, with the soldiers firing into the area, despite the soldiers' thermal detectors. In an effort to reclaim control, the shadows became so enamored with their weapons that they failed to see the prisoners' approach by striking from unexpected angles and avoiding drawn-out conflicts rather than immediately engaging in combat. The strike targeted their equipment and morale with precision and purpose. His objective went beyond simply fleeing. But in an effort to undermine their unity, they tried to encircle the prisoner with their train to block possible escape routes, but they didn't realize how adaptability the inmate used the instruments at his disposal to improvise traps and predict their maneuvers. An energy cell that was discarded turned into an explosive weapon, scattering the soldiers and disrupting their formation. The inmates' tactics caused the turmoil to worsen as their confusion grew and their communication broke down. Grew increasingly hostile and turned their sophisticated technology against them by using their own weapons. Liabilities. During one skirmish, he was able to neutralize their heavy artillery by retrieving a plasma rifle. His comprehension of their shortcomings increased with every interaction, and he modified his strategy. Consequently, he wasn't merely struggling to stay alive, he was destroying their whole tactic. The extraterrestrial troops, who were not used to this kind of opposition, they were unprepared for an opponent that fought with such unwavering tenacity because of their nervousness and overconfidence. Used their sophisticated systems to make up for their lack of flexibility, but those systems didn't work. He disrupted the inmates' supply lines with well-planned attacks, their tracking devices and communication relays, making the soldiers' anxiety clear as their numbers decreased, they changed from being the hunters to the hunted. The inmate didn't fight because his movements were too evasive and his attacks were too planned. His strategies, which combined raw instinct and polished strategy, were unpredictable, much like the other species they had subdued. Ability that made them uneasy all the time, making them doubt everything they did and causing their confidence to be replaced by hesitation. The troops tried to summon reinforcements in a desperate attempt, but the prisoner had already foreseen this and obstructed their communications previously. They were cut off from their command, and their advanced training proved ineffective against an opponent who refused to cooperate on their terms if they were left to face him alone. The physical toll on the men became evident as each stride they made appeared to bring them closer to another ambush. Fear and fatigue started to wear them down, but the prisoner appeared to be untouched by the experience, remained steadfast in his efforts to take advantage of their vulnerabilities. He resisted their every move and was deliberate, patient, and persistent. He had already dismantled their next line of defense 2 steps ahead of them, and the troops' attempts to reassemble were faced with failure. Their morale fell and their numbers kept declining. Every battle ended with the same result: another soldier was killed, another weapon was used against them, and the inmate was incredibly efficient. He didn't spend energy on pointless disputes. Each action he took was calculated and accurate, By the time it was too late for the troops to see the full scope of their situation, the prisoner had not only escaped the eye. He was no longer merely a fugitive after gaining control of them and using their strength to his advantage. He had turned into their predator. Thanks to his adaptability and close, he was an unstoppable force thanks to his comprehension of fighting the terrain that once appeared so alien to the prisoner that it suddenly benefited him. He isolated the troops by using the surroundings. Each solitary encounter went the same way, driving them into smaller groups where their numbers mattered nothing. Once invincible warriors were now engaged in combat after the prisoner emerged victorious. For their life when the fighting peaked, the soldiers' plight led they made crucial mistakes because they were afraid and acted hastily. Leaving one by one, they fell into the prisoner's traps despite their training in a misguided attempt to stop him. Once symbols of their authority turned become instruments of their trade, technology made meaningless against his inventiveness downfall. The inmates' triumph was not only physical but also mental. Broke their self-esteem, revealed their flaws, and turned their haughtiness against them. He didn't simply flee. He destroyed their authority piece by piece, and by the time the conflict was over, the Galactic soldiers were vanquished, broken, and forced to deal with the fallout from their hubris. The inmates' unwavering silence demonstrated that their technology and conceit were insufficient. For Earth's resilience, the prisoner maneuvered precisely, taking advantage of the openings created by. When the disorganized soldiers' first attempts to reorganize failed, they were left. The remaining forces, dispersed and exposed, did not know his precise location, but could sense the sound of a calculating hunter encroaching on his victim. His strategy wasn't chaotic. Instead, every step he took was intentional to minimize extraneous noise. Methodical in order to seize every opportunity while creating anxiety and perplexity as he carefully scanned the area with his pistol ready. The first soldier he targeted was separated from the others. The prisoner moved quickly to prevent the soldier from reacting with a firearm. He obtained in the process turned into a useful tool for its firepower, as well as a psychological tool to support the escalating panic. The tools he had taken from his adversaries now represented their weakness and further shifted the odds in his favor. He started employing psychological strategies to cause minor disruptions to control the soldier's motions with a purposefully misplaced piece of equipment here. A surprising noise there. Everything meticulously planned to lure them into his traps. Their advanced training had equipped them for simple battle, but they weren't ready for a foe that thrived on uncertainty. Every trap wasn't as the troops tried to organize. The prisoner took advantage of the chance to weaken their determination and executed them perfectly. Due to their dependence on conventional formations, they unintentionally contributed to his approach. Predictable, the prisoner thwarted their intentions by first removing their leaders who might provide unambiguous directives, which caused the remaining soldiers to become confused and lack unity due to unclear command chaining. Disintegrated as each soldier started acting on their own initiative, motivated more by terror than by strategy, while the rest of the squad attempted to adapt, but their changes were reactive rather than proactive, and every effort to stop the inmates' behavior was unsuccessful. Because they were unaware of his actual goal, which was to dismantle their organization rather than just try to eradicate them. Their communication systems were already hacked, making it impossible for them to work together. Thus, they had to rely on screaming over the confusion, and using antiquated hand gestures only increased their vulnerability since the noise exposed their locations. The soldiers' power disparity increased with each confrontation. Cautious at every turn, their assurance giving way to uncertainty, and they second-guessed everything they did out of dread that it could result in another ambush. The prisoner took advantage of their reluctance and turned their passivity into his benefit. He was aware that fear was a weapon as potent as any gun, and he used it expertly. And as the soldiers' attempts at retaliation grew more desperate, they built up defensive perimeters in an attempt to trap the inmate, but he employed their own tactic against them. Coming from unusual angles, concealing his movements and weaponry with the surroundings, he forced them all to fight in close quarters, which was not a good fit for their large-scale engagement designs. Interaction resulted in them having fewer resources, and lower psychological soldiers started to leave their stations and escape in small groups as the toll became apparent. Knowing that their panic would spread, the prisoner released some of the groups in the hopes of surviving the ranks and made the group even more unstable. Those who remained were either too fearful or too disciplined to leave, but their determination was waning. They were no longer a unified team, but rather individuals attempting to endure the equally debilitating bodily toll. Fatigue set in for hours. The soldiers were on edge, continuously moving and looking around for any indications of the advanced suits that only provide a limited amount of oxygen and energy started to malfunction under the extended stress. While the prisoner appeared to be unrelenting, his actions purposeful and efficient, his capacity to persevere, and the turning point occurred when the inmate started using the adapt, which stood in sharp contrast to their growing weariness. Soldiers' technology to their use, including their guns, shields, and even his arsenal of tools included tracking devices, which he altered to work against them in ways that didn't foresee that the soldiers' inability to rely on their own technology would cause them to become suspicious of. For it to work as planned, the instruments they had previously regarded as signs of their superiority now symbolized their failure. The surviving troops became suspicious of treason within their own ranks with each mishap. One of their own was accused of sabotaging their systems, and this internal strife contributed directly to he didn't have to destroy every prisoner's hand that further divided their forces. Despite their declining numbers, the soldiers' fear and mistrust were working in his favor. He used their limited resources to establish a defensive posture in a last-ditch effort to plan a counterattack, to strengthen a tiny area because they thought that by putting the prisoner in an open conflict, they may reclaim control, but the inmate saw this coming and took advantage of it. He broke through their defenses from a distance rather than coming close. The soldiers are already tense because they are using their own weapons to destroy their energy shields and exhaust their supplies. They were in a panic as they saw that their last line of defense was failing, and their well-prepared plans fell apart as the prisoners were precisely targeted in their weakest areas, and the conflict did not end in a spectacular fashion. Due to the soldiers' total collapse, their supplies were too limited, their morale was too low, and their numbers were too little. The prisoner didn't have to battle them all at once, because he was too exhausted to put up any real struggle. Meticulously, one by one, and each triumph served as a reminder of their conceit and evidence of his nonetheless. The battlefield was quiet by the time the final soldier died. Despite the ordeal, the prisoner stood by himself, breathing steadily, despite the technology and weapons that had previously represented. The power of the cosmic soldiers was now dispersed and shattered around him. He had not only physically vanquished them but had made the lesson evident by exposing the shortcomings in their reliance on technology and their underestimating of human potential. Strength is determined not only by superior numbers or advanced instruments, but also by flexibility and the capacity to use the haughtiness of the adversary to their detriment. The Galactic troops were once so sure of the prisoner demonstrated that the very attributes they had ridiculed had completely eclipsed their supremacy. Not to be understated, Earth's tenacity led the warriors to deploy their last line of defense. Desperate to recover control of the machinery intended for large-scale operations, heavy artillery and sophisticated drones battles wasn't appropriate for the prisoner's calculated precision, so he examined their strategies. Rapidly spotting weaknesses in its use, each weapon turned into an additional instrument he could use to further demonstrate their over-reliance on technology caused them to become increasingly desperate as their attempts to use it failed. Recklessness. The seasoned commander, a Genera L, took over and was committed to trying to turn the situation around. The prisoner recognized the need of eliminating the threat and bringing peace back to his troops. The soldiers' realization of the seriousness of their failure was signaled by the general's arrival. But it also offered a fresh chance because it was simpler to predict a single author's authority than a disjointed group of the commander launched an aggressive offensive after the prisoner modified his plan. Specialized facilities equipped with cutting-edge targeting systems to monitor the movements of the inmates, who are energized by. Their boss was present and tried to carry out coordinated strikes, but the inmates' inventiveness outstripped their newly discovered resolve, and he proceeded to take advantage of their unpredictable, outwitting the more experienced units and destroying their offensive strategies. The terrain turned into an extra ally for the inmate. The troops found it difficult to move through the crowded area, which interfered with their equipment and hindered their advancement the inmate used to functioning in such. Things went smoothly, and he isolated small groups of soldiers by using the natural barriers to engage them on his terms. Each clash severely reduced their overall numbers and morale. Realizing his force's limits, he ordered a change in strategy. Ordered his remaining troops to use their most sophisticated defensive systems to defend a central area in order to construct an impenetrable barrier. Their goal was to entice the inmate to meet them directly, thinking that although their superior firepower would guarantee the prisoner's victory. They saw through the plan and got ready appropriately. He didn't go straight to the fortified position, but instead started a series of energy cells that power the shields were the first targets of deliberate attacks to erode their defenses, leaving the detainees and soldiers were at risk of additional attacks. But precision made sure that every hit was accounted for in a methodical manner, tearing down the defenses they had so heavily relied on the soldiers for. As their last stronghold's confidence started to erode, the general tried to adjust again by using the remaining deploying heavy firepower in a last stand. The weapon's potent but sluggish deployment proved useless against the inmates' speed and agility were used against them by him, generating distractions that made the men, already overworked, strain to keep up with the worthless artillery. As the defenses gave way, the prisoners' relentless attack brought the soldiers closer to the center of the encampment. When they realized their last line of defense had failed some, they were overcome with terror, tried to escape, but others held out hope that the general could yet change the situation. The prisoner, however, stayed committed, his plan was clear, and his determination was unwavering. The remaining men, now outnumbered by their own terror, paused as a confrontation with the general became unavoidable. Must step in and stop the prisoner as he approached the general with the most cutting-edge weapons available, ready for his weapon served as a representation of their technical dominance in the last encounter. However, the inmate had already shown that such supremacy was useless in the absence of flexibility in tactics. The confrontation was quick and decisive. The inmate's dexterity and the general's reliance on firepower was overshadowed by combat expertise. His weaponry was strong but unwieldy, was unable to deliver a last blow, but the prisoner took advantage of every opportunity by utilizing his surroundings. The general's self-assurance diminished when he became aware of the magnitude of his opponent's talents, leaving the remaining soldiers without leadership once the general became incapacitated. The prisoner had completely lost, both numerically and morally. They had exposed their strengths and flaws. The shortcomings of their arrogance and dependence on technology. He not only withstood their attempts to control him, but by the end of the battle, they had destroyed the whole basis of their plan. The advanced equipment that formerly represented the Galactic Army was no longer visible on the battlefield. Dominance was found in ruins, which was evidence of the inmates' ingenuity and the soldiers who the convicts' victory was absolute. Those who were left were survivors too damaged to fight on. Accomplished by combining intelligence, flexibility, and an unwavering determination to overcome the obstacles, the message conveyed by the prisoner's deeds extended much beyond the battlefield. His triumph wasn't merely a personal one. Shown how resilient Earth is and how dangerous it is to underestimate its inhabitants, and the cosmic soldiers had come into the battle with a sense of superiority and emerged with a sobering realization of their fragility. The detainees' acts would reverberate across their ranks, warning anyone who might view Earth as an easy place. To the Galactic soldiers' mission came to an end when the general was defeated. They were doomed by their conceit and dependence on technology, and the prisoner would never forget their failure. Standing amidst the wreckage of their endeavors had demonstrated that strength comes from willpower, and the post-battle ingenuity of those in possession of them permanently altered the galactic powers. News of the inmates' escape and the destruction of their units quickly circulated across their leadership structure, networks setting off a chain reaction of anxiety and uncertainty, leading to the loss of extremely advanced equipment and well-trained soldiers. Were terrible, but the psychological toll was even worse. Underestimated a foe they thought was less important, and now they had to face the consequently. The Galactic Council called an urgent meeting to review the situational reports from the survivors. Depicted a bleak scene in which one person had methodically destroyed their operation that takes advantage of their arrogance and transforms their cutting-edge technology into liabilities. The council discussed if this was a singular occurrence or a representation of Earth's larger capabilities. The thought of a world full of people with comparable fortitude and resourcefulness caused anxiety to spread. Through the chamber, analysts and strategists examined the mission's shortcomings, emphasizing the sharp difference between the reality they experienced and their presumptions. The cosmic forces had depended too much on their dominance in technology. Disregarding the value of flexibility and the psychological warfare, they had previously addressed the inmates. Acts questioned their belief that Earth was a primitive backwater and that their conceit had cost them dearly. Entire strategy for conquest, compelling them to reconsider their tactics within the galactic military. Morale fell, and soldiers who had previously believed they were unbeatable began to doubt the inmates' techniques, training, and equipment dependability were examined as commanders looked to recognize how he had transformed their advantages into disadvantages. This self-examination exposed more serious defects. within their systems, revealing weaknesses that had previously been disregarded in favor of technology. Furthermore, the ripple effects were not limited to military civilians. Hearing of the inmates' escape and triumph on galactic worlds made them doubt the reliability of the idea that one person may defeat a highly skilled unit engendered a narrative of vulnerability among rulers that the galactic leadership found difficult to control attempts to minimize the catastrophe through propaganda. While rumors of dissension continued to erode the perception of invincible power on Earth, the prisoner's defiance and tenacity were symbolized by his acts, and his triumph was honored not as a personal triumph, but as evidence of humanity's ability to triumph. The message was clear: Earth would not be an easy target, even with unfathomable odds. Its citizens were considerably more capable than their enemies recognized, and this renewed feeling of purpose and solidarity inspired the inmates' return to Earth in an attempt to bolster planetary defenses and get ready for any future encounters. But unheralded signaled the start of a bigger movement, and his debriefings offered vital information on the cosmic military and scientific shortcomings, military tactics, and equipment. Leaders put in endless effort to evaluate this data and create new strategies and technologies to thwart possible. Eventually, the emphasis switched from reactive defense to proactive deterrence, making sure that there would be no more attacks. Confront far more difficult obstacles than the Galactic Council did in the meantime. Some factions demanded swift reprisal in response to mounting pressure to act, claiming that inaction might encourage other planets to oppose their control, while others cautioned that another unsuccessful campaign might have disastrous effects on the stability of their empire. The captives' victory having established a strategic dilemma that forces the Council to consider the dangers of continuing to interact with Earth. There were no diplomatic lines open between Earth and the Galactic Council, and neither side was prepared to start contact, cautious about disclosing their goals or vulnerabilities for Earth. The preparation for the cosmic armies was the first priority, but it was out of control. Both sides were aware that the next action would decide how their battle would play out because the balance of power had changed. Beyond the immediate aftermath, the prisoner's legacy inspired a new generation of leaders. The lessons that warriors and intellectuals on Earth took away from his experience became fundamental to human strategy. Training regimens that emphasize resilience, adaptability, and the value of taking advantage of an opponent's shortcomings were revised to include these ideas, guaranteeing that humanity would be prepared for whatever obstacles that lay ahead. A wave of reform commanders started to reassess the Galactic Empire after the prisoner's victory. Their dependence on technology, while acknowledging the need for greater flexibility and adaptability tactics, the event caused a more significant change in how they approached conquest as they tried to comprehend and honor their opponent's traditions and abilities. This shift, however gradual, the prisoner's story became a legend and signaled the start of a new era for the cosmic armies. It was a story of defiance and triumph for humanity on Earth and beyond. The Echoes was a warning about the perils of conceit and the strength of the human spirit directed at the galactic forces. Since his deeds persisted in influencing the course of Earth's and the galaxy's overall future, his triumph was not only a historical event, but a pivotal moment that reshaped the relationship between two radically different societies.